My name is Steve Sieck. I'm really honored to be here in this beautiful space. As Hank mentioned, I teach choirs at Lawrence University's Conservatory of Music. And in that role, two of the primary things that I do are training future choral music education, right, future choral music teachers, and future professional singers. It's a very big opera program. But I also get to work with a lot of students who are looking for something different than their organic chemistry problem sets. Of course, I work at the Fox Valley UU, where I select and perform service music and lead choirs and instrumentalists to perform music that complements the message of the service. That's the thumbnail version of what I do. I help people sing music together. This is not the career I thought I would go into when I was younger. I thought I would go into something that made more money. I started playing piano in 5th grade, but I had no intention of becoming a professional musician. I just liked making music. It was fun. And I only joined choir in 9th grade. And the only reason I did is because my older sister was in choir and they got to sing in Europe. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world, and I wanted to do that. For what it's worth, the director retired after I finished 9th grade choir. A new director came in, and we never sang in Europe, and I am still bitter about it. In high school, I liked choir, but I also kind of hated choir. I hated it when the director wouldn't correct the wrong notes. I hated it when the choir talked too much. I hated it when the group was performing badly, or if the music was too hard. I hated the feeling of what it was like to be in a bad choir, and I ruminated about it. I would keep a mental journal of all the things the director was doing wrong. And I just wanted to get rid of that feeling of being in a bad choir. Now, if you've never been in a bad choir before, let me tell you this from my lived experience. It's the exact same experience as being in a bad workplace, or being on a bad committee, or being in a state or a country that isn't going the way you want it to go. There's this endless question, can't it be better than this? Why isn't it better than this? I knew that I liked singing, but there were 1 or 2 mountaintop experiences in high school when I got to sing in the Illinois All-State Choir, where you gather 120 of the best high school singers, led by one of the best conductors in the country. And then you get goosebumps. Everything always sounded amazing, and you think to yourself, this is what choir is supposed to be. And then you go back to high school the next week and go, this isn't it. So I didn't know actually what I wanted to study in college. Again, I still held out hope that I'd make more money than music. But what I really, really loved in college was a sequence of classes that my university affectionately called the Great Books. The Great Books. The first year, 3 trimesters of a class called Human Being and Citizen, where we pondered the distinction between the two. Right? What does it mean to be a citizen? What is justice? Well, we read Plato's Republic and the Odyssey and Crime and Punishment and the Gospels. Basically, if it addressed the question of what we owe one another, we read that book. And then the second year, now this was my favorite, Classics of Social and Political Thought. Oh, I would take that class 5 more times if they'd let me. I think I'd have to donate more first. How do we organize ourselves in community? Here's the question. Is blowing a red light inherently immoral, or is it wrong because we've agreed not to? Right? So once we got to social contract theorists and the idea that I want to keep driving and you want to keep driving, but let's just make a deal that whoever has the red light stops so we don't both crash. We talked about questions like that over and over. Now, meanwhile, I'm still in choir in college, seeking that all-state experience. I want to like it, but I'm still not liking it, and I'm still keeping that mental journal of why this is no good. So instead, I mentored with that college choir director. I didn't tell him that I was keeping that journal. That would be rude. But I sat down with him. We took some independent studies in how to pick music, how to study scores, how to plan rehearsals. Let's fast forward all the way to 2015. We're going to skip the years where I taught 7th through 12th grade, skip grad school, skip my first college teaching job. No, let's get to year 5 at Lawrence University. And I'm co-directing some choirs with my colleague. Guess what? Our top advanced choir is not very good. Don't get me wrong, the students are immensely talented. My colleague is immensely skilled. I think at this point I'm really well trained, but the choir's got that not very good vibe about it. We don't sound good, we don't feel good, It's the this should be better feeling. Oh, I've created this. What has happened? Why is it so hard to get a choral experience like the one I had in high school? Remember, in Allstate, you were just gathering the best singers in the state. I've got the best singers in the country at this point. I've mastered all the skills I thought I needed. I knew how to hear all the wrong notes. I knew how to sing. I knew how to conduct. I'm clearly missing something. So I want to put a pin in this and come back to it in a moment. When we talk about choirs in American discourse, and by the way, we don't talk about choirs very often in America, even though 54 million Americans sing in a choir. When we do, we usually employ this image of a choir as like a paradigm of peace, of cooperation, of unity of purpose. We say things like, look, budget reconciliation is hard work. We're not going to sit around singing Kumbaya. Why not? That would probably help. Or we say things like, oh, if I get that promotion, I swear I'll hear a choir of angels singing hallelujah. Or I heard this last week, Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams are in perfect harmony. So this choir, right, the choir becomes, that's a football reference. The choir becomes a metaphor. It becomes a metaphor for this like idealized community. Out of curiosity, how many people in this space have sung in a choir? Just a show of hands. Wow, that's amazing. That's not usually, that's a high percentage. Good on you. I would argue that 100% of us have sung in a choir. We just hummed the doxology together, right? No, I'm not trying to trick you, but I'm just saying that a group of people singing the same song at the same time for the same purpose could be considered a choir, right? Choir is what happens when people sing together. Okay, I get one nerdy professor tangent, and this is it. The word choir, which used to be spelled with the Q-U, comes from medieval French, and it's a word for where in the cathedral the singing happens. It's an architectural term. So as you walk into the nave of a cathedral, and you're walking, and then there's the transept, and then at the very back is the choir behind the altar. It's, if you've ever been in a cathedral that has those beautiful wood-carved like seats, the stalls there, that's the choir of a cathedral. It's where the singing happens, which is funny to me because singing happens everywhere. So what we mean when we say choir is the sense of like spiritual uplift. When we use it in common language or when we think about it architecturally, we imagine the choir to be transcendent, right? Which brings us crashing back to 2015 with our not so good choir of really good singers. Now that's not fair. There was specifically one choir that wasn't doing well, and the others were fine. It was the advanced choir. It was the highly select choir that was juniors and seniors in vocal performance for the most part. And these students were very unhappy for very specific reasons. First, most of the singers in that choir had to be in choir. They were not choosing it. It was a requirement for their major. And it turns out, I don't know if you've known this or not, but people who want to become professional singers often don't like choir. It's very, I had a hard time trying to explain it to my mother once. She said, but they're singing. And I said, yes, but here's the difference. Becoming a professional opera singer means developing the biggest sound you can make. You need to sing to the back of the Metropolitan Opera over an orchestra, right? So you need to develop a huge voice and express it as freely as possible. And 40 people doing that at the same time does not make a choir. So students with that potential, students with the potentially enormous voice, come to Lawrence because they have big old voices, but they've been shamed for that in choir. They've been shamed for that in high school because it's, why can't you sing quietly like everyone else? Now, sometimes being a choir director in an opera program feels like being the soccer coach in a football program. You can make those football players play soccer, but it's really tough for those offensive linemen to play soccer, and it's not even the same sport. So a lot of the choir was grumpy because they had to be in stupid choir. And then the rest of the choir was grumpy about this attitude. We were not aligned in our purposes. Second, most of my students were utterly exhausted. Most students were in classes and labs all morning from 8 to 4, and then choir, and then they go immediately to opera rehearsal until 10 p.m. No lunch, no dinner, no break, just work until 10 p.m., then at some point eat, and then do homework all night, and then repeat again the next morning. Every human needs a break to eat and breathe and be human again. So these 4 hours a week of having to be in a stupid choir that you didn't ask to be in, well, that was an easy target for anger. Now, third, and most specific to fall 2015, they were mad about what we were doing. Now, to put in context, fall 2015, Ferguson riots, Black Lives Matter, we were singing songs about the exotic gypsy, which was wildly offensive to Roma people, right? We were closing the concert with a slave spiritual, which was wildly offensive to treat songs of enslavement as a concert closer. We were making them sing and embody the offensive tropes of white supremacy culture that they were rising up against. And we had no clue what we were doing about it at the time. Fourth, we were not leading with any clarity of purpose. My colleague and I were co-directing the ensemble. I'd be in the room for 30 minutes teaching my songs, and then he'd be in the room for 30 minutes teaching his songs. There was an endless, but mom said, but dad said, but mom said, and there was no vision to what we were doing. So you can imagine, choir is about getting goosebumps. It's that spiritual uplift. And we were doing the reverse. We were making people feel very deflated. Here's what happened for me. One very wise student was talking with a small group of students during the midst of this crisis about how to explain to our directors that we don't want to sing this music. I invited myself into the conversation. I dismissed them as silly adolescents in one word or another, and I walked away. And that student reached out to say, that hurt. I called her back. We talked for an hour. She said choir is a very different experience if you're Black and female and gay. And I had to sit with that. I had to sit with that for a couple of days. And I finally realized why choir was not very good. I needed to change. So I started to learn. Yes, I had read the great books, as my university called them. And as it turns out, and I double-checked on the shelf this week, every single one of them was written by a white man. So now I needed to start reading some other great books. Books by Bell Hooks, or James Baldwin, or Judith Butler, or Angela Davis. Eventually, I wrote a book. I wouldn't call it a great book, but I wrote a book about all the ways that I realized I had harmed students in choirs, and hoped that it would help the conversation among choir directors to think about how our teaching hurts people. And then I started teaching differently, maybe a little bit more empathetically, more open-hearted, more aware that different singers in the room have different experiences than mine. And choir got better, or at least it stopped being painful. But now I was curious again. I wanted to go back to my own journal of what I was doing wrong. I could tell that there was more to being a great choir than program repertoire from a wider range of perspectives. So I found the best choirs in America, and I hung out with them. I wrote a book on what they did and what they focused on. You don't need to buy the book. I'll tell it to you in one sentence right here. These great directors focus on community. They focus on social contract, on what we owe one another. They focus on creating a supportive, loving family in choir. They don't worry about excellence. That comes after you get the community. They, in fact, all made the exact same joke. My first year, I picked the 50 best singers in the school, and it was a disaster. I'd been doing that for years. This is my 7th year of that strategy when they told me that. No, these directors selected students who wanted to be in choir. Now, when you interview directors who work with graduate students, that's different. Then they were just trying to be another professional choir. But college choirs are for 18 to 22-year-olds. It turns out that what I'd forgotten is that adolescents want connection and belonging. I then realized everybody wants connection and belonging. My students want to do really good work. Don't get me wrong, they are ambitious. But their good work emerges after they have a community identity. First, feel safe and connected. Then, thrive. That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? My students weren't even meeting the basic. They weren't even eating and sleeping. So now I'm trying to teach them this self-actualization stuff while they're exhausted. Have you ever had a moment when you realize that you've been doing your job completely wrong? It's cathartic, let's just say that. So what have I learned as a choir director since then? First, everybody needs to belong. Everyone needs to find a home and feel connected. That means leaving time in choir rehearsals to celebrate that Hannah got into grad school, or that it's Addie's birthday, or to read a Mary Oliver poem. Second, help people get their needs met so they can eventually self-actualize. Build in days off so students can catch up on term papers. Connect students to the resources they need on campus for mental and physical health. Work with the committees in the college to institute a protected lunch hour. We did. This is the first year in decades when Lawrence has a guaranteed lunch hour. Let that sink in. Students sing better when they have eaten lunch. Third thing I've learned is to embrace diversity, and I don't mean it the way you're thinking. Yes, of course, we need low voices and middle voices and high voices in a choir. That part is obvious. But the reason I got goosebumps in the all-state choir was because those 120 kids were from all across Illinois. They were so different, not only vocally, but geographically and culturally. And we came together in our diversity to make that music. In a great choir, you need students who love poetry. You need students who love to be funny and improvise. You need a student who loves to be a soloist. You don't need 50, but you need a couple. You need students who love to meditate. And the reason you need this range of voices and personalities is because of being in a choir requires all of those things. How can you dive deeply into the text of the song you're singing if no one in choir has been in an English class since high school sophomore year? How can you give a great performance of Verdi if everyone in the choir is trying to sound like a little boy? You need a range of people. Fourth, embrace diversity. And this time, I do mean it the way you think. Yes, of course, the repertoire we teach needs a bigger tent than white men. There's so much good music from every country, from every era, from every gender, from every identity. More importantly, there are so many ways of singing and so many ways of learning choral music. Here's something I learned when I was teaching. I will stand here and I will conduct while you try and read the music. And I will stop every time you make a mistake, and I will point out that you made a mistake. That is the mode that I learned, that is the mode that I taught, and that is, to find a point on it, why choir wasn't great. That's not a great way of teaching music. It turns out there are a lot of ways to teach music. So one thing I've been playing with at Lawrence lately is teaching students how a song goes by rote. I sing the phrase, you sing it back, I sing it, you sing it back. And what's so interesting is how much more joyous that experience is for the chemistry major, and how much more frustrating it is for the music major, because they're going, what page is that on? What page is that on? They've forgotten that they have ears, right? And I say this because white supremacy culture teaches us that there's one way to do it, and that it's with a written score. Learning a wider range of music with a wider range of teaching dismantles white supremacy culture in the conservatory. The fifth thing I learned, and I'm still learning it, is director, get over yourself. I'm not that important in my students' lives. I wake up in the morning thinking about choir, and I go to bed at night thinking about choir. That doesn't mean they do. They may love and respect me, but they are not here to validate me. They may sound bad today, but it's not because I didn't teach this well. Maybe they're having a bad day. I can set up an environment in a lot of important ways, but I can't control how people feel. And the faster I realize that, the faster they feel safe and connected, because now they're not in charge of my feelings. My job is not to teach singers how to follow me. My job is to teach singers how to become singers. If I do my job perfectly, I can skip class this next week and they'll be fine because they'll know what to do. Finally, keeping an eye on the big picture. Choirs will get lost in the weeds, but I know where the song can go and what needs to happen. So I need to stay above that tree line. I need to shake up rehearsal with a dance party. We did that on Monday. Or read a poem. We did that on Tuesday. Or have students work in small groups on their own. We did that on Wednesday. They have to feel safe and connected before they can thrive. And if they're not thriving, we need to sort out the connected part. And here's the thing. Choir is a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor of that spiritually uplifted community. It is idealized. But these questions remain. What do we owe one another? What is my role as human being versus citizen? How do we organize ourselves in community? I think choirs teach us how to live in better harmony. So let's review what I've learned. Everyone needs to belong in this UU community, in this town, in this state, in this nation. When people behave badly, I hear in that behavior, I don't feel connected anymore. So when people do dangerous things, if my response is, look at these stupid idiots, they're so dumb, I've forgotten our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of everyone. And all I'm doing when I judge people like that is push harder to divide our interdependent web into an us and a them, and that's not a good choir. Second thing I learned was to help people get their needs met. People who don't have work or medical care, people without stable housing and food, will behave differently than people who do. People who are isolated will behave differently than people who are connected. People who are traumatized or attacked will behave differently than people who are safe. The third thing I learned was to embrace diversity and not the way you thought. A democratic community thrives when there's a robust discussion of ethical questions that arise. When a committee has, what did we call it, the democratic process of where the money should go, right? That's a good sign. We should have debates about government spending or foreign wars. That's what democracy is. The other thing I learned to embrace diversity the way we did mean that originally. I don't mean it's important to have a Black friend. That's usually a hard thing that you're asking of your friend. What I mean is when you have Black friends, your white perspective gets shaken up in ways that are good for you. When you learn another language, you develop a richer curiosity for words, and more importantly, you develop a deeper empathy for those in your community speaking to you in their second or third language. You ever had that experience where you're abroad and you thought you were fluent in a language, and it turns out you sound like a second grader? It's very important, okay? Diversity is not about performing your allyship. Anyone can change their Facebook background to support something that day. It's the least you can do. Diversity is about recognizing that someone else's lived experience actually matters to you, and that we are all a part of this interconnected web of existence. When we close ourselves off to, I don't know, fill in the blank, whoever you close yourself off to, Muslims, Republicans, whoever, we engage in a spiritual lie that we are not interdependent. What's the other thing I've learned, director, get over yourself? I am 1/330 millionth of this nation. I have opinions, some of them are informed, and that's it. That's it. I'm one singer in a massive global effort to sing. There is no choir director for real life. That's something we have to sit with, accept, and work through. The voting public can elect a representative or a governor or a president, but it will not feel like a choir if 49% of the singers say, that's not my choir director. You can ally with other people who want to sing your song. That's sustaining and joyful. But if I can describe social media in one sentence, it is this. If I was the choir director, blah, blah, blah. Well, you're not. And I'm not. And really, no one is. It doesn't mean that we can't learn to sing in harmony. It just means that until we rediscover our capacity to see our interconnectedness, we will drive ourselves mad trying to find a choir director to lead us. The last thing I learned was to keep my eye on the big picture. How many of us in the last week got into a really, really stupid fight in office politics or committee work and would rather have spent that hour going for a hike, talking to a friend? More and more, the engine roars of freak out about this now. That is not the song you have to sing, even if someone hands you that score. No, Mary Oliver teaches us that what we need to know from her memorable lines in The Summer Day. Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? May we sing our songs with courage and humility. May we feel connected and like we belong. May we live in harmony. May it be so. Amen.